Thank you to these candidates for taking on the difficult challenge of running for the United States Congress. Let's give them a round of applause. Mary and I can say, sadly, it's a damn difficult challenge, but it's important to this democracy, and we thank each of you for what you are doing. Open Democracy of New Hampshire is delighted to host this event with Take Back the Republic and their dynamic executive director and my friend John Putner. John, thanks for being here. With us today are a number of campaign reform leaders. Dan Weeks in the back. I see you, Daniel, there. Daniel was the chair of Open Democracy. He's been fighting for campaign reform for years, even though he's young in years. So Dan, thanks for all your great work now and the years ahead. And where's Jim Rubens? Jim? Jim just advised me he's been at this for 20 years, James?
Yeah.
We were on the 2008 Commission on Public Funding Elections together. In 2008, we've been friends ever since. And thanks for being with us again. I understand that you're the regional director for Take Back the Republic and on the advisory board of Open Democracy. So thank you, Jim. And Olivia Zink, our executive director, is somewhere waving in the back, and thank you for your good work. Nick Giacobucci, who's sitting right here, vice chair of Open Democracy, and Liz, thanks for your good efforts. Take a look at the op-ed today. Feingold, and any others that I missed. Any others that I missed, raise your hands if you're a great leader for public funding, excuse me, campaign reform. We're not putting up. Open Democracy's vision is of a democracy where we no longer have a barrier for candidates to run, where we no longer have a money barrier for candidates to run. And when every citizen's voice and every citizen's perspective is heard and considered, not just those who have the wealth to make meaningful campaign contributions. Our plan at Open Democracy is in the development process. We will develop a plan over the next few months to attempt to make that vision, tough vision, a reality. But you're here today not to listen to Open Democracy. You're here today to listen to the candidates. And I am delighted to introduce my friend. John Putner has had tremendous success in Republican campaigns. He's been a dynamic leader of Take Back the Republic, a very important campaign reform organization, a wonderful partner. And John, thanks for being with us, and thank you.
Thank you. A couple of program notes. If you haven't turned in a question and want to, I will be collecting these for after the opening speeches. So I'll just be right over here. They're little cards, but if you write them on another piece of paper, we'll process them. Thanks for having me in. I think they wanted someone who didn't know any of the candidates yet to draw from the hat and do other things, since I wouldn't have any bias from past campaigns. But I'm happy to say that New Hampshire, we now have our largest membership per capita in the country for Take Back Our Republic is in New Hampshire. I've had hundreds of people sign up, interact, so it's just a great state. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think you really are lucky to have something special here in New Hampshire, and you don't realize how far it's gone away in other parts of the country. The only time New Hampshire gave me any problem was when I was running 16 states coalition turnout for Bush Cheney 2000, including South Carolina, and New Hampshire did not pick Bush that year, and I was suddenly told that if we didn't win South Carolina, the job was over, and I could forget the other 15 states. So that was the only time I ever had an issue with the state. But you do a great job of vetting candidates. And I mean, the fact that you actually meet candidates and talk to them is something that in most of the country is novel. But I think it's led to a more democratic process. The presidential vetting, as well as the legislative districts, where you actually can know your legislator, even that's unusual in most of the country. And I'll give you one quick example from last week. We came in to say, hey, conservative rank and files want reform on money in politics and gerrymandering and some of these issues. There's sometimes a leadership issue, but when you get rank and file to where I was out running campaigns and people do want change there, it's a very unifying couple of issues. And last week in Ohio, we did a referendum to get gerrymandering reformed, and we were able to, across the aisle, get both sides on board. There were some opponents, but it was a place where referendums had failed twice in the past. And we went through last week and won 74 to 26 in a state that had always rejected gerrymandering reform. But there was a key moment in that may strike home the issue we have now. One of our allies was one of the Catholic dioceses, and they were putting things in the bulletin. And I asked them why they were on board in this issue. And they said it's so clear that members of Congress in most states just don't pay any attention to their constituents. And they brought up two hot button issues, so ignore the actual issue, but it's for an example. They were against some of the recent moves on immigration, on stopping immigration. Yeah, they tended to be more pro-immigration. And then secondly, they had a late-term abortion issue they were hitting. So again, ignore the issues for a second. The point was, they had some of their biggest turnouts in citizen involvement in letter writing, phone calls, everything else. And the head of the diocese said, I realized, unlike even a few years ago, none of the elected officials cared. Like, it wasn't acknowledged that 10,000 of their constituents had just reached out to them, because it's all a money game now. So we don't say our end goal is to get money out of politics. That certainly could be a means. That's a laudable means. Ours is just that elected officials do three things, basically. They raise money, they represent constituents, and they solve problems. And right now, when new candidates are often being told you need to spend 85% of your time raising money, and by the way, that's after you're elected too, there's no time for reaching out to constituents or solving problems. That's the big change I saw in 20 years of running campaigns, and so I think that's our end goal. We want elected officials to focus back on you. We want constituents to have faith in their government again, and the money in politics is a means to the end. So with that, I've drawn names with no biases again. We're going to start with 5-minute intros, and by the end of that, if you have a question, that would be great. We're going to go in this order from right to left, and the questions will reverse back and forth. So with that, I'll turn it over to the candidates for their opening statements.
All right, can everyone hear me if I put this right here? Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you all for making the time to come and for your care for and commitment to democracy, which is why we're here today. My name is Maura Sullivan, and I live in Portsmouth. I come from a family committed to service. I'm the oldest of 4 children. My grandmothers were leaders in Jesuit education and raised our family to be men and women for others, and my grandfathers both fought in World War II. I went to a great public high school, and I saw there how important education is as a pillar of economic opportunity for all. And then my own journey of service began when I went to college on a ROTC scholarship. I soon thereafter joined the Marines. Joining the Marine Corps was the single best decision I ever made. Totally changed my life. I traveled and trained all around the world, in Japan, on the Korean Peninsula, and then fought in Iraq in the Iraq War during 2005. Where I served alongside the greatest men and women that I have ever known. What I also saw when I was there was that members of Congress at the time and leadership in Washington, and this is 2005, were totally out of touch with what was going on just west of Baghdad. And their decisions got a lot of other people's kids killed. We were sent to a war without a plan to win and without the resources to succeed. And members of Congress, both parties, didn't ask the right questions. And I really didn't think that that was right. And so I left there with a very deep conviction and commitment to dedicating my life to serving our country and to advocating for people I saw didn't have a voice at the tables where decisions were being made. Oftentimes my fellow veterans and service members, and many times the working class families that most of them came from. And then my journey of service continued here in New England and then in the Obama administration. I was appointed by President Obama 4 years ago to serve on the leadership team in the Department of Veterans Affairs when it was in crisis and to help implement the Veterans Choice Act. And then I served on the leadership team in the Pentagon, where I fought for reforms and policies that benefited military families around the globe. Following my time in the Obama administration, I finally had a chance to put down roots. Never had a chance to put down roots before, and my fiance and I moved back to New England. We bought our first home in Portsmouth. I got a job working at a New England healthcare company I was really excited about, and thought that picking out paint colors at the Sherwin-Williams store was going to be the biggest decision I'd be making in 2017. Started planning my wedding. And then Carol announced she wasn't running for re-election. And I really didn't hesitate to run. I really didn't hesitate at all. I was one of the first candidates that jumped into this race. And the reason I didn't hesitate is that I have never in my life, to include my time in Fallujah, Iraq, and my more than 6 years of service in the Obama administration, seen a moment like the one we are in our country, where the fundamental principles that make us America are at stake and at risk, and our democracy is under attack. Our institutions are under attack. And this chaos and this bitterness and this polarization is not who we are as a country. It's not what I fought for. It's not what I put my life on the line for. Our trust in our institutions is eroding. And I'm here today because I want to ask for your support to come together and to rise above the chaos and bitterness that we're seeing, and to fight for a government and restore trust in our government and integrity in our government, and a government that works on behalf of the people that elect them. And that's why I'm here today asking for your support. I think as all of us are, deeply, deeply concerned about the influence of big money in our politics. Let me be clear. This is a threat to democracy. It's a threat to democracy. And as long as Citizens United is the law of the land, it is a threat to democracy. When I served in the Marines, it wasn't about a political party. It wasn't even about a president. Shoot, people didn't even ask where you were from most of the time. We were there on behalf of the Constitution of the United States and fighting for democracy. And so long as Citizens United is the law of the land, our democracy is at stake, which is why, as a member of Congress, one of the first things I would do is work on a bipartisan basis to introduce an amendment to overturn Citizens United. But it's going to be very hard to get that done, and we've got to do it on a bipartisan basis. But we have to do that because our democracy is at stake. But there's other steps we can take too, that Congress can take in the meantime. Congress should require super PACs to disclose their donors. And also we need to take a very, very hard look at regulating political ads on social media that companies like Facebook broadcast. We saw in 2016 the threat to our democracy from foreign entities like Russia. That is what is at stake, and our democracy is under attack. So Congress needs to do something about that too. And we need to ultimately put Congress back in the hands of American citizens and the American people where it belongs. So thank you again all for being here today. Thank you for your commitment to democracy. I look forward to working with you and fighting together on behalf of our country and our state and for our democracy. Thank you.
Very quickly, that was a perfectly timed 5 minutes, so thank you, because I failed to say Rick is going to kind of give a warning a minute out, but you were perfect. You have it down, so just for everyone else. We'll see you in 1 minute left. There you go.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here, and I'd like to start off by thanking everybody that's showed up here. I mean, we got a lot of candidates up here, and sometimes it's easy to forget as candidates. You think it's all about us because we're sitting on this side of the stage, but it's really all about you guys and trying to give you a voice. And that you're out here listening to us here today, I think is really impressive. My name is Daglin McCachran. I'll just tell you 4 quick things about myself, something I'm not, and then talk a little bit about campaign finance reform. So first and foremost, I'm a dad. I'm from Portsmouth, but I'm a dad. And that's probably, if there's one thing that you can put on the tombstone, that's going to be it. And we're going to lose this primary. The rest of what I plan to do, I want to make sure that I'm a good dad. And that's part of the reason I'm in this race, is to so that my daughter has the same opportunities growing up in the state of Hampshire that I did. Second, I'm a husband to a lovely wife. We should all be as lucky to marry somebody that really pushes us to become the person that we are. And when I talked to Lori, my wife, about whether or not I was going to do this, the only question she asked was, are you going to try to change something? That was it. That was the only question. It wasn't, are you going to go down there to Virginia, down to DC and be a part of the system, or are you going to try to change the system? And once I convinced her that I was, that's what we were going to try to do together, she was on board. Third, I work in technology, and I help companies and our engineers form that dialogue. I think that's somewhat important in Congress just because of the fact that with everything that's changing, we shouldn't have people sitting on this side of the stage asking people like yourselves, how does Facebook make money? I think it's important that our leaders know how technology works, so to what Maura was saying, we could actually regulate them and make sure that we have meaningful change there. And fourth, I'm from New Hampshire. You don't have to be from New Hampshire to represent the district, but you have to love the district. And I think that loving this first district and loving New Hampshire means that you know it. You know it from Portsmouth, where I live across the street from the house my grandfather built, to here in Concord, which is outside the district, and Manchester, up in the Lakes regions and down to Londonderry. It's important because at the end of the day, that's who we're representing. You know, we're not representing moneyed interest, we're representing the people here and trying to make their lives better in the best way possible. And then finally, I'm not a politician. You know, there's a lot of people, not a lot, some people that hold that against me, that say you need to have political experience in order to represent us. And I don't think that that is true. I think you have to have experience, like the experience I wish I didn't have when my wife got sick and having to fight through insurance companies. The experience that I'm going to have watching my daughter go to elementary school and learn not how to code or build something, but to be a victim. That's important, that we actually have the experience that matters. And I'll just tell a quick story because I'm new to politics, and who knows, there's only 9 of us here in the Democratic primary, and I don't think Massachusetts does too many things better than us, and they have 13 Democrats running in their 3rd congressional district. So maybe one of you today will be inspired to run, and if you do, I'll tell you a story about one of the first things that you will likely do. You're going to talk to some people and some friends. And it's really emblematic of who you're talking to. If you talk to folks that are in the political system, the first question that's going to be out of their mouth, before you say, hey, I support Medicare for all, I think that everybody should graduate high school with the ability to really go after the American dream without having to go into debt, is going to be, can you raise the money? That's where this system is. It's not, how do you plan to make change? It's, do you think you know enough people that you could pull together $100,000 in the next 3 months to mount a viable candidacy? And I think that's the most broken part of our system. Before we even actually start talking about whether or not or what we plan to do, it's really about how are you going to get that message out? How are you going to raise the money? And I think that we have too many politicians right now that are focused on the next election, that are focused on raising that money so that they can win that next election. We need more leaders. We need more people that aren't worried about the next election, that are actually talking about the issues that matter. Because when I talk to my neighbors about running, they're like, great, what are you going to change? How are you going to get it so my kid doesn't have to, go into debt, or I have to go into debt to make it in this America? What are you going to do about the fact that, our neighbor over there is on a GoFundMe page because they got cancer? How are you going to change those things? And those are the conversations that we should all be having, instead of the conversation of how are we going to raise the money. And in order to do that, we need campaign finance reform. So I saw the hand go up. I don't have that internal clock, so I'm going to think that I am running out of time here. So I'm looking forward to your questions. But really, thank you for being here, because we have to remember the government is us. It's you and me. We are the government. So thank you.
Ready to go. Okay. Mark McKenzie. Started out as a city firefighter in Manchester when I was 21 years old. I did that for 27 years, became the president of the AFL-CIO. I'm currently a state representative. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather, the 2 best grandchildren in the world. And I'm here because all of my life has been about fighting for working people, fighting for the issues that are important to working people. And let's just bring a couple of those issues up. And I bet you, whenever we ask people what do they want, they always say we want decent health care, we want a clean environment, we want to roll in the pharmaceutical companies in this country, and we want income inequality. And unfortunately, while we all say this throughout the country, what always gets in the way is the bags of money that they throw in front of us from the NRA, from the pharmaceutical companies, from all the people who oppose what it is that we're fighting so very hard for. And let me tell you, I've been up against that. I've been involved in a lot of campaigns over the years, and one of them is right here. And I've been involved, and I tell you, money is getting worse and worse and worse. Norm DeMoore is one of the congressmen I first worked for, $50,000 to run for the Congress of the United States. And right now, you're looking at a whole lot more money than that to run for the Congress of the United States. I agree. I think the system stinks. And we got to overturn Citizens United. But there's a few other things we can do in the meantime. We got to start the process of shutting down the system where people use the Congress of the United States as a way to become an apprentice for the lobbying industry. You roll through Congress, you spend 2-4 years there, just like we do when you're trying to be an electrician, and then the next thing you know, what do you know? You pop into some legislative firm somewhere down in Boston, or in Washington, or around the country, and then, boy, you're making the big money then. That's going on all the time. The other thing, the whole idea that you're going to spend 6 to 8 hours of your day as a congressperson raising money. Well, I bet you're not doing that at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're probably doing that during the day, because you have to do it during the day. You're doing it running down the hallway to do a vote. You're doing it in your car. You're doing it in the airport. So that time is not being used in a good way. The other thing, there's other controls that we can take. Look, we got people, no disrespect to my colleagues here, the idea that people are coming out of the defense industry, and they're rolling right into the system and becoming lobbyists for the defense industry. Why is the budget 58% of the budget of the United States? It might have something to do with the fact that the money is involved and people are rolling into that whole system. The other thing, you hear about bundling and all kinds of issues like that. But in the final analysis, what we need to do is to start the process of electing people that can go to Washington that are not tied up and committed to lobbyists and all kinds of people in this country. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not that guy. I represented working families for all of my adult life. When a fundraiser came in, he looked at me and he says, "Show me your book of contacts." So I rolled them out to him, we went to a little bit, and he said, "Oh, this is a great group." No, you don't understand. I represent working people, you get it? These are not millionaires. These are not people who are going to spend a lot of money on a campaign. These are the nickels and dimes of working families all throughout New Hampshire. And those are the kinds of people that are going to fund this campaign. Look, you got a decision to make here. This is a terrific group of people. They represent, they're good Democrats, they represent, well, I'm sorry, no disrespect to my Republican colleagues. You just fine, they just come in, I haven't met it. But, no disrespect, everybody's here, you got a choice. You got a choice of people who have access to it, you got a choice of different characters and different people at different stands. What I stand for is getting money out of politics, turning it back over to the people who are really important in this country, and giving it back to them. And I promise you, I have no long-term strategy for Congress of the United States. I know who I am. I know I've got gray hair. I look in the mirror every day. But I can tell you, I'm not tied to anybody, and I don't have to be. Because I can get down to Washington as somebody who is free, shake it loose, shake all of those things loose, and do what you want your congressperson to do, which is work like heck on the behalf of people in the state of New Hampshire. Thank you.
Can you hear me all right with this? All right. Well, thank you all so much for being a part of this discussion today. I'm Chris Pappas, and I'm also a candidate for the Democratic nomination in the 1st Congressional District. And I'll just say one thing at the outset. Carol Shea Porter is an amazing individual because she is the same person today as when she went down to Washington, D.C. in 2006. And I think that, unfortunately, is a rare occurrence today in politics. We've got to make sure we have someone representing this seat who is rooted in the communities of New Hampshire, who has independence, and who is going to fight big money and the entrenched special interests that are in Washington, D.C. And I'm here today to tell you that I'm up to the task. And I'm asking for your support and consideration in this race. Right now, I serve on the state's executive council. I grew up in the city of Manchester. I've lived in New Hampshire my entire life. I run a restaurant business that's been open for 101 years. My great-grandfather started it. I've learned just about everything I know about the world around me from that restaurant business, whether it's how to clean a table, but more importantly, what it's like to make payroll, what it means not to ask someone to do something that works for you that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself, that you work together as a team, and that it's more than about the bottom line. It's about how you can lift people up, those who work with you and those in the greater community at large. That led me to get involved in public service. And as we all know, in New Hampshire, we don't have full-time politicians in this state. We have people that step forward at the legislative level and to run for executive council and serve there who have another profession. And for me, it's been a balancing act. But it's one that I care deeply about because New Hampshire is a beautiful place, and we've got to work hard to keep it that way. And I think that public service is one of the ways that we can tap in to the expertise, to the energy, to the enthusiasm that exists in communities across this state to move New Hampshire forward. I've been lucky to serve on the Executive Council in an arena where we can work together, where we can find common ground between Republicans and Democrats and move the ball forward in critical ways. I've been proud to be a leading voice to fund Planned Parenthood health centers time and again, and to work to cobble together bipartisan coalitions to make that happen, to provide critical health services for thousands of women and men in this state. I helped provide the critical support for the Medicaid expansion program, also in a bipartisan fashion in the state, in a way that now 53,000 individuals have coverage through that program, and it's the best tool we have to fight the opioid crisis. And when Carol decided to retire, I looked at Washington, D.C. and thought, things operate under a different set of rules down there, and we need to have folks that understand the process of New Hampshire, have accomplished things on key issues, and are ready to roll up their sleeves and push back against a system that is broken. Washington is slanted toward the big special interests, the wealthiest donors, and the biggest corporations at the expense of the rest of us. And you don't have to look too far to find the traces of that. Just look this past year with the tax scam legislation that was passed through Congress, where most of the members had no idea what they were voting on, but the lobbyists knew exactly what was in that legislation. In fact, you had Republican members of Congress who were coming out and saying, we've got to do something for our donors to keep them happy. That was said by Mitch McConnell. It was said by Republican members of Congress. That is an abomination. That type of thinking exists with respect to a fundamental policy where trillions of our tax dollars are at stake. You don't have to look any further than the drug issue, where Congress loosened regulations in terms of DEA oversight over the big drug distributors who are complicit in the creation of this opioid crisis because they had given out big campaign contributions to members of Congress. You can look further in the past, whether it's the gutting of Glass-Steagall or other issues where soft money and big contributions have come into play in terms of the policy outcomes in Congress. So this goes beyond who gets elected. This goes to the core of what policies are voted on and what is passed through the halls of this Congress. And we need to make sure that we return to the roots of this country, that we focus on how we can move the ball forward for families and communities and businesses of this state. But we can't do it if we have a system that's awash in big money. So some solutions that I can get behind. Public financing of elections. We've got to incentivize small donors with a tax credit, and we've got to reward candidates that raise money through small donations within their own home state. We also have to ensure that we close loopholes that allow foreign companies to contribute to political efforts in this country. We certainly have to overturn the Citizens United decision through a constitutional amendment. And we also have to work to ensure that there's disclosure and transparency, that you can see where the dollars are going, because right now, a billionaire or a large corporation can flood our election system with money, and we don't know where it's coming from or where it's going. So we've got a lot of work to do in this campaign. And I think we've got to make sure we raise these issues forward. As I go around and talk to the people of New Hampshire, we've been making a lot of stops in this campaign. This is something that is at the forefront, that ties into each and every issue that we've got to consider. And we can't have a system that's going to respond to the needs of the people of the state or this country if we continue to have a broken campaign finance system. So let's fix it, and let's get all our heads together and figure out how we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lincoln Soldati, and I'm a native of New Hampshire, born and raised. Grew up in Portsmouth and Exeter. First 10 years of my life was at Wentworth Acres in Portsmouth, which was a government housing project for returning GIs. Moved to Exeter when I was 10 years old. The great thing about growing up in the Acres, both my parents worked, and every day I went to a different neighbor's home for lunch. Never knew that morning who it would be, but whoever I hung out with that day is where I'd end up going. But what was important about that experience is that's when I developed my love and my sense of community and what neighborhoods are and what neighbors are about. And that's my experience of what New Hampshire is about. Throughout my life, neighbors and community have been paramount in my life and everywhere I've lived in New Hampshire. So I moved to Exeter when I was 10. I went to St. Thomas Aquinas High School. I then went to the University of Notre Dame, got drafted in 1969, went back and finished up at Notre Dame. Fortunately, they took me back. And then I came to back to New Hampshire, to New Hampshire's first, finest, and only law school, and still is. And I have to say how happy and proud I am to be here today. This was not the building that the law school started in. It was over in East Concord. At the time, we called it Frank's. And I noticed coming in the building today, there was a name on the outside of the building, Dean Viles. And it reminded me of my first day of law school out at what we called the Bull Farm in East Concord. I walked in the door. The school was 2 years old at that point. And there's this very tall, lanky guy on a ladder who's up in the suspended ceilings. He's got overalls on. And I figured, oh, well, you know, here's the janitor fixing something. You know, what an auspicious beginning, my first day of law school. Gee, they don't even have the lights working. And this man steps down from the ladder, very tall, leans down, he's got a goatee, gray, leans down to me, outstretches his hand to me, and he says, well, welcome, young man. I'm Dean Viles. And it was a wonderful place to go to law school, I must say. I love this school. I love what everything they've done, and this is a wonderful facility now that they have, and we should all be proud of this facility and this law school. So after law school, I ended up for a while with police standards and training, and then I went on to hang a shingle in Concord for a while, and eventually was hired by Joe Netto, who many of you may know as a Superior Court judge and eventually a Supreme Court judge, and he was my mentor. When Joe got appointed to the court, I left, and Freddie Catalfo, another icon of the New Hampshire bar, talked me into running for county attorney in Stratford County. And that began a love affair with a job that I held for 9 terms, 18 years, which was fabulous. And we did a lot of things that we were very proud of, including transforming the way sexual assault cases were handled and prosecuted and investigated in New Hampshire, a standard that is now pretty much a statewide standard. After that, once I left, I became a defense attorney for the remainder of my career, which about 1.5 years ago, I retired after nearly 40 years, a career I'm very proud of. I've been involved in politics because of the nature of being in New Hampshire and being an elected official. I was on the Somersworth School Board as well. But in New Hampshire, after the election, I went to Standing Rock to work with the Sioux for their water rights. We're here to talk about campaign finance reform. We have somebody in the audience, James McConnell. Some of you may be aware that he actually introduced a constitutional amendment, one that I have subscribed to, that would require, that would basically overturn Citizens United and require any contribution be made within a congressional district be people who can vote in that congressional district. I would introduce that into the House of Representatives of the United States Congress. Citizens United is an abomination. It allows dark money. Everything that was predicted by the opponents of it has come true. And it's absolutely essential that we overturn Citizens United. And I want to thank you, James, for the constitutional amendment you proposed. And I hope that everybody signs on to it. I'll be happy to answer any of your questions with respect to any issue. Thank you all very much, and welcome to UNH School of Law.
Hello, I'm Terrence Rourke, and I want to thank you for allowing me to come here today and speak with you about the invasive nature of money in our politics. We don't have Western participatory democracy anymore. What we have is legalized bribery. And for the most part, the media is complicit in this. When you talk about a campaign, what do you hear? Who's in, who's out, and how much money they've raised. You don't hear anything about policy. You got to go looking for it. And what kills me the most is when you see a candidate who probably has no business running for the Congress of the United States, and the money numbers come out, and they have this big cash haul, and all of a sudden, magically, their resumes have gotten better. Magically, they're an important person. Magically, they're somebody we need to talk to. And that's wrong. That's wrong. And something else I've been introduced to in this, since I'm running, is political action committees. Let me tell you folks about PACs. They come to you and they want you to fill out a questionnaire. They want you to take a pledge that when you get to the Congress, you're going to vote their interest, regardless of what may be good for your people and the people of your district. So when you see that someone is taking money from a PAC, no matter what the source, and I know our party likes to get cute and say, well, we don't take corporate PAC. This is every PAC. You know that when someone's taking PAC money, they have swore a oath of loyalty to someone, not you, to a third party. So before they said they swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, they swore a loyalty oath to somebody else in exchange for money. And something else that's increased recently since Citizens United. We've seen all over the nation and in New Hampshire an unbelievable increase in what we call carpetbagger candidates. They come into our states with millions of dollars of PAC money and lobbyist money. And they expect the folks in New Hampshire or the folks in California, wherever you're from, to just roll over and go with it. And forget about folks who've been in your communities for years serving our constituencies. And now we can see this in action, the effect of dirty money in politics. Recently something called the Crapo bill came out of the Senate. Senator Warren calls it the Bank Lobbyist Act. And what it does is essentially guts Dodd-Frank. And when Dodd-Frank was done, it was passed to sort of protect us from what the banks did that caused the recession in 2007 and 2008. The Congressional Budget Office said that this bill is going to increase the likelihood of bank failures, it's going to increase the likelihood of the need for bailouts, it's going to add $670 million to the deficit, and the two greatest beneficiaries are Citibank and JP Morgan. And yet, it could have been stopped. There's 49 Democrats in the United States Senate. It takes 41 votes, you can stop anything. But 17 Democrats went along with this bill to gut Dodd-Frank. The average donation received from banks and related industries of those 17 Democrats the last 5 years is $222,000. And our own two Democratic senators in New Hampshire, they both voted for it. And in the last 5 years, Senator Hassan received over $420,000 from banks and related industries, and Senator Shaheen has received over $319,000 from banks and related industries. Have these big banks done anything in the last 10 years to earn back our trust? No. Does this bill help the 16 state charter banks in New Hampshire? No. No. Does it protect anyone in this room?
No.
So why did our two Democratic senators vote for it?
They took the PAC money.
Because they took $500,000 of money from Wall Street. And worse yet, when these banks run amok and fail again, these same senators will vote to bail them out again at our expense. Where's your bailout? Yet, there are some people who think this is good politics. There are people who think that we'll win back the working class voters in this country by taking dirty money from Wall Street and voting their interest. What kind of addled brain thinks that way? The Democratic establishment in Concord and the Democratic establishment in D.C., they think that way. And what have these folks given us? Full Republican control in Concord and full Republican control in Washington, D.C. And these same wizards now want to pick the nominee in this district this fall. Do you trust them?
No.
I sure don't, and that's why I'm running for this seat. But the hope is not lost, folks. There's something we can do about this. In the long term, what are we going to do? You've heard it before, we're going to overturn Citizens United. Since we're in a law school, I got to tell you, this is going to go down with Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and the Slaughterhouse cases as one of the worst cases in the history of the United States Supreme Court. We also need to pass Representative McConnell's Real Reform Amendment. And we have to have publicly funded elections. It works in other countries, it works in other states, it's the only way to get money out of politics. But in the short term, we must elect people who aren't beholden to these interests. You as a voter have homework to do. The day of the lazy voter is over. And something I would tell juries when I do a closing, I'd say, when you walk through those doors into the jury box, you didn't leave your common sense at the door. And you don't leave your common sense at the door when you walk into a ballot box. So what you got to do is you go to a candidate's website and see where they stand on issues. But more importantly, see the ones who don't take a stand on these issues, or any issue. And why have they done that? Because they've already been bought, folks. And they know exactly how they're going to vote when they get down to D.C., but they don't want you to know that because you're not going to vote for them. The second step you need to do as an informed voter, go to the Federal Election Commission's website. Every one of us up here, the dollars that we bring in are listed on there. And you can tell right away what industry they've gotten it from and where these individuals work who've given this money. And that's going to let you know whose interests they're going to have in mind when they vote in D.C. So finally, let me talk about myself. When I vote in D.C., I'm going to have two things to consider. Your best interest in my conscience. That's it. I'm not for sale. Thank you very much.
So let me thank everybody for coming here. This is an extraordinary issue that unfortunately does not get the media attention that it deserves. My name is Levy Sanders. I've lived in New Hampshire for the last 15 years with my beautiful wife and 3 extraordinary children. Folks, we're losing our democracy at a level that is unprecedented. It's unbelievable. We have a scenario right now, if you can actually believe it, that Sheldon Adelson just gave $30 million to the Republican Party. Now this was of interest to me. A vast majority of Democrats and Republicans believe in campaign finance reform. That's the most important thing we have to understand. This is a bipartisan issue. Second, so don't feel too bad about Sheldon Adelson. He's worth only $678 million. Just to clear here. The guy named the Koch brothers. Everyone knows who the Koch brothers are. In this election, they will spend, actually, the brothers, $400 million. What do they get for $400 million? They literally get every single Republican to bow at their feet. I want people to think about that. $400 million. As everybody knows, the Citizens United decision was, in my opinion, the second most disastrous decision ever in the United States Supreme Court on a 5-4 decision. It allowed the floodgates to go to a level that is unprecedented in American democracy. We now have a situation, if you can actually believe it, that literally corporations can buy politicians. Literally, they can literally buy it. You literally have a situation where somebody can take $200 million out and say, listen, by the way, come over to me, bow, and what do you want from me? I want to destroy Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. No problem, we'll do it. We want to destroy, ultimately, environmental regulations. No problem. We want to destroy Social Security. No problem. We'll do it. No problem. We have a situation, as you're probably aware of, that we literally have a scenario that is so egregious right now that people have given up on democracy. In this current election, in terms of District 1, we will probably have 15 to 20% of people who will vote. That is embarrassing. That is disgusting. We live in an oligarchy. We don't even live currently in an actual democracy. We need to change these things. What do we need to do? We need to have the 28th Amendment. 28th Amendment is so critical. We need to say enough is enough. The American public is entitled to one person, one vote. Furthermore, we have to give the power back to the people. We have to deal with campaign finance reform. We have to say, ultimately, from my perspective, anybody who takes corporate money, there needs to be tremendous transparency, and there has to be deep, profound questions and ask people, what does it mean when you're taking corporate money? It means you're beholden to those interests. So in conclusion, I beg you, this is the whole essence of what democracy is about. We have to take on these corporations. We have to take on super PACs. And we have to ask the deep and profound question of why is it that we're losing our democracy? Thank you very much.
Stand up here because you get tired listening to all these politicians.
Hey, I'm not a politician.
I'm Andy Martin, and I'm the only Republican who's running in the 1st Congressional District. I wish I could get the nomination that way, but I don't think it's going to be that easy. One of the things that candidates do is they make promises. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And inevitably, they'll tell you that they're going to stand up to the big guys, and they're going to stand up to the establishment. They're going to overturn the settled order. And by the way, the settled order is bipartisan. Let's not kid ourselves. You know, I was checking under the table to see if one of the Koch brothers was hiding there. And I want to know who paid for the sandwiches, maybe Adelson did. But, you know, Hillary Clinton outspent Donald Trump 2 years ago. So there's plenty of dirty money in the Democratic Party. And I'm not going to go any further. I'm not being partisan. I'm being bipartisan by saying there's scandals in both parties. One of the patron saints that we should acknowledge today is Michael Cohen and all the money he's vacuumed up. And then, of course, the ultimate patron saint is Mick Mulvaney, who said when he was in the U.S. House, he only spoke to people who gave him money. So we know there's a problem, and it's a bipartisan problem. This is a wonderful gathering, and I thank all of you for coming. And I thank you for inviting me. You know, you meet new people, you make new connections. I found out that John Rao is the nephew of a very famous Washington lawyer, and he was a very, very brave man. And you know, in a small way, he helped to inspire me when I went to Washington as a young guy a long time ago. Joe represented the Yablonsky family after Joe Yablonsky was murdered. Now, they play rough in the United Mine Workers, and it took a guy with some pretty tough guts to stand up to them. So I was so happy to find out that John's uncle, somebody I had met and admired many years ago. I have a sort of contrarian point of view. Everybody's going to tell you, I worked for this guy, and I worked for that guy, and I did this and that. Yeah. I have a couple of unique qualifications as a candidate. I'm the only guy that's been on 3 presidential enemies lists. Now, hint, Republicans and Democrats. President Nixon blew his stack at me more years ago than I plan to remember. I was on one of his enemies lists. Then George W. Bush, I was the first name on his enemies lists. He didn't like me at all. And there's been a lot of bad blood between GW and myself and his brother Jim. Finally, I was the first name on Obama's enemies list as well, for him helping to dig up some of the questions that later became quite prevalent about his own political history. So I have stood up to the establishment, and I have been in the cone of fire, and I have taken heat, and I've got a few scratches and wounds to prove it. Although I'm running for the U.S. House, I'll give you sort of an interesting footnote or a factoid. The Senate, U.S. Senate, has 3 office buildings: the Richard Russell Building, the Phil Hart Building, and the Everett Dirksen Building. I worked for Senator Hart after when building is named. The building was named after him because of the high esteem that he was held by his colleagues. I worked with Senator Dirksen's office, another man who was held in high esteem. They named a building after him, and I worked in the Russell Building. So my roots in independence and fighting for ordinary people and fighting for consumer advocacy, seeking to advance the rights of women and equal pay for equal work are very, very deep. When you look at the promises, say, well, we can trust Andy, he's been there and he's fought and he's ready to do it. I have 2 words for you as I wind up my remarks. And those words are term limits. I believe passionately that term limits should be the focal point. It's the place where we run the artillery and the tanks to attack the system, because that will do more to stop the special interest than anything else. What happens is in Washington, power is entrenched, and it goes on and on and on. I would love to have the support of Republicans, of course, but I'm also going to tell you that although I will campaign, I am campaigning in a partisan primary. Should I have the privilege to represent you in Washington, I will serve in a nonpartisan capacity. I'll vote with the Republicans. I'm not going to vote for a Democratic speaker. But each of you who are here today, many of whom may disagree with my views, will still be able to say, let's go and see Andy, because he'll listen to us and he'll talk to us. That's the kind of a person we need. That's the kind of a life I've led, and I've got the experience. And that's the kind of representative that I'd be. And I think I would make New Hampshire proud. Because with me, it's going to be performance, not promises, I know how to agitate the system. I know how to attack it. I know how to take the blows when they come the other way, and I will do that in the U.S. House. So New Hampshire will have a strong voice, an independent voice, and a voice for government integrity. That's the kind of career I've had, and that's the kind of career I will continue. Thank you very much, all of you, and I appreciate you coming today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, John Rao and Open Democracy, for your tireless advocacy and leadership on these issues over the years. And thank you, John Putner and Take Back Our Republic, for hosting today's event. It's really great to see so many people out to discuss this important topic. My name is Naomi Andrews, and I grew up and live in Epping, New Hampshire. I worked for Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter for over a decade and just recently resigned my position to run for the seat. I have been living and breathing the issues of the 1st Congressional District as Carol's Chief of Staff and while managing and winning 2 of Carol's campaigns. I'm honored to have received Carol's endorsement to win her seat for many reasons, but high on that list is the fact that she has been fighting for campaign finance reform from day one in 2006. And I ran both of those campaigns embracing and following her rules about clean money. Campaign finance reform has been at the top of my priority list for years. I know candidates can win and be supportive of campaign finance reform because Carol did, despite being outspent 10-to-1 numerous times. And I promise I won't take a dime of corporate PAC or DC lobbyist money. Over the past 11 years, we've talked the talk and walked the walk, literally. I've walked with many of you long distances around the state to highlight the need for campaign finance reform. And I won't stop. I remember sinking on the couch in the Congressional office in 2010, devastated when I heard about the Supreme Court decision. I said at that time, we couldn't even begin at that moment to understand how terrible the Citizens United decision would be for us. And I was, of course, right. The cesspool of dark money poses a grave threat to our democracy. And that's why I support a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. You know, poll after poll shows that everyone, Republican and Democratic voters alike, care about this issue. But I have to tell you the truth, there's only one Republican member of Congress whose name appears on any bill out there to address this issue. We know that a lot of dirty money has been spent to convince voters that both parties are the same and all politicians are the same, with one purpose: to make people feel hopeless and discourage them from voting. Trust me, this issue is nonpartisan to voters, but the Republican politicians in Washington reject it. So we need to elect people who prioritize this issue. We need that constitutional amendment so clean campaigns won't get swamped and outspent. I know and understand the current realities of Washington. I've watched as so many members of Congress spend hours on the phone each week raising money for their next election, fighting to stay financially viable. Carol refused to spend her time that way, and I will refuse to as well. I promise you, my job in DC will be to fight for the people of New Hampshire by attending my assigned committee hearings, voting on the House floor, crafting legislation with my staff. And on the weekends, I'll be here in New Hampshire, attending events and meeting with stakeholders to make progress on these important issues. I also don't believe that only wealthy people should be able to run for Congress. I don't have wealth, I don't come from wealth. My parents worked hard in honorable blue-collar jobs, and I'm a first-generation college graduate. I believe we need people in Congress who get it, who actually are the rest of us and will fight for the rest of us. I will be a champion for campaign finance reform. I'll co-sponsor bills such as the Disclose Act, Koch Act, Democracy for All Amendment, and any other bill that I craft or a colleague does to make progress on this issue. Granny D said, democracy is not something we have, it's something we do. I take that very seriously. And policy decisions should be made because of people with the biggest ideas, not the biggest checks. I believe that public service is a public trust. I humbly ask that you learn more about my campaign and follow me, and that I can earn your support. Thank you.
How you doing? Thanks for finally listening to me. My name is Brian Belanger. I'm running for the 2nd congressional seat in Congress. I'm the only 2nd CD campaigner here today. It must be because I don't take that super PAC money, and I'm not out of state trying to raise money from super PACs, and I look at we the people. That's something I haven't heard here today. I haven't heard from one candidate that we the people mean. You know, those words from way back when there wasn't a Republican, a Democratic Party, an Independent, a Tea Party. It was just we the people meeting in Pennsylvania, farmers, local clergymen, the storekeeper. They actually showed up to argue the issues, to discuss the issues, and to make laws that actually helped build who we are and where we are. I plan to get to Congress in the 2nd congressional seat. I plan to hit the ground running to try and introduce bills like the Reform Amendment and try and overturn our Citizens United. However way we can, I will work hard. I will make sure I'm known. I know some of us watch C-SPAN and we see that there's no one there arguing. There's no one there discussing issues. You know, we need to have people that are getting paid to go to work be at work. I know if some of you don't go to work tomorrow, or if you know, retired, or when you had a job didn't go to work, you guys you'd be fired. We'd all be fired. You know, so why can't we hold our congressmen and our senators to that same standard? We need to have them at the votes and vote. You know, this abstaining is ridiculous. They either need to vote for something or against it, so we know that in the next election we can get rid of them if they're always going to vote against something. You know, we need to help we the people and bring that back to Washington so that the voice of the people is heard. A little bit about myself is I was born and raised in New Boston, New Hampshire. I went off I never served our country, which I thank the men and women that actually went out and served our country for us. Back in the 80s, I went off to college because I wanted to do commercial diving, and it wasn't available in the military at that time. They put a freeze on that job. So I was one of the stubborn ones and went off to college. I started building hydro dams and bridges, worked through Pennsylvania quite a bit. And then I went to work on satellite earth stations with my brothers. My brother owned the company. So I've always been in a family-oriented run company. And that's what I miss. New Hampshire's losing that mom and pop shop because government don't care anymore. They're pushing all of those small businesses out for these big corporations. And again, it's because we're being lobbied. I know our 2nd district congresswoman fought when she was going to get elected, her first term. You know, one of her biggest things was to stop outside money from New Hampshire. She wanted only money from New Hampshire to run our congressional campaigns. And yet, she's got $3 million that have been donated from super PACs and outside money in her coffers right now. I don't believe that money's going to help with a 22% approval rating. So we need to just get a Republican that's going to go up and be true to the people. My family's run businesses their whole life. You can look us up. My mom and dad ran a restaurant for 18 years, helping serve the local community. And you know, I just feel that we the people need to get back, and that's who I'm there to represent. And I'm open for any and all questions that come to me. That's why I came today, and my counterparts aren't here, so. I have no counterparts that are going to come in and ask any questions. They're afraid of people, I think. I don't know. But I hope you guys check out my website, and you know, hopefully you'll see me at some events. I roast corn on the cob and talk to people at a lot of outside events, flea markets and carnivals and stuff. So we do some fun stuff. So please, thank you.
Well, Thanks. I don't think anyone went more than 1 minute over, by the way, so that's fantastic. Which leaves us almost 30 minutes for questions. I'm saying I got a lot of great questions. I grouped them into kind of 6 categories to couple them so that we have time. This is going to be a little more lightning round, 30 seconds each. So on each grouping of questions, and we'll start with Brian in the first one and just keep reversing. So the first questions deal with how you will spend your time raising money if you are elected to Congress. And the 2 specific questions are, how do you feel about a network news report that candidates are being trained to spend 50% of their time fundraising before and after election? I will say that report was false. The number was 85%, and interns ripped that page out of the book when they found out the media was coming. So I do know the backstory on that, but appreciate the question. And then secondly, if you do win in November, you'll be asked to spend 30 hours a week raising money. How do you feel about that, and what are you going to do about that? And if we try to keep about 30 seconds each. Thanks, Brian.
Well, I'm hoping that we the people are gonna, it's not my seat in Congress. Again, I just keep saying this over and over and over again. It's we the people's seat. So I'm hoping that I'm gonna have to be in Washington, do my job, and we the people are gonna come out and they're gonna, when I come back in town and I come visit you in your town, you know, on my big bus, I'm going to come and visit you because that's where my office is going to be. I'm going to drive to your town. I'm going to visit with you. That's how my fundraising is going to be. You're going to come and talk to me about what we're doing in Washington. I'm going to explain to you what we're doing in Washington, and we're going to come up with a collective reasoning to help come up with some ideas that we can fix things in Washington because it's the people's seat. So I'm hoping my fundraising is going to be part of what I'm working. When I'm out here visiting with the people, that's how I'm going to fundraise. Because the only money I want is the people's money, because you guys are the ones who are funding.
We will try to keep it real short. Thank you. Thank you.
Nope. I will not spend all my time raising money. I know how to win this district. I know that it's about the people and not the money. Carol won her first primary with $17,000. And that's the way I intend to run my primary. If I raise some more, that's fine. But I will not spend all my time raising money. I'll spend all my time with the voters. And then when I'm in DC, I will be working hard for you. Huffington Post once called our office the hardest working. We earned that, and I plan to continue that tradition.
Well, in addition to my experience and my qualifications, which I offered you in my principal remarks, and you can go to andymartin.com for more detailed remarks, and Andy Martin for Congress for a copy of my honorable discharge and my certificate of commendation for service. I probably hold another title, and it's the world's worst fundraiser. And that's about the end of it. I don't find that a very good thing to do, and I will try to minimize what I do. Probably put, if I were to get elected to Congress, I'd probably put some kind of low dollar spending limit, $100 or $250 on the amount of contributions, and just be done with it. And if I can't be reelected on the job that I do, well, the hell with it. I failed. Thank you.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I despise raising money. I'm not good at it. I tried in telemarketing. I failed miserably. It's one of the few jobs I probably got fired at. But again, yeah, the bottom line here is we need to reach out to the, to the public and talk to people about what's going on with Citizens United in terms of why we need to overturn it and to deal with the 28th Amendment. And I increasingly think that we talk about Democrats and Republicans, both parties will understand that definitively that big money and politics don't go hand in hand.
Well, what's interesting about that number, 85% of the time, that's fundraising or 30 hours a week, and the word they use is trained. Well, I don't know who these people are. I think they're going to train me, but it's not going to be the Democratic establishment in Concord, it ain't going to be the Democratic establishment in Washington, D.C. I've sworn an oath to this country twice as an Army officer and as Assistant United States Attorney. When I take that oath for a third time as a congressman, again, I'll be fighting for your interests. I don't give a damn what they say in D.C.
Yes, my intent is not to spend my time raising money. My intent is to spend my time providing constituent services here in New Hampshire and drafting legislation in Washington. That's it. I'm doing the job that I was elected to do. And one of the things I would say, my concern, if I am elected, is not about re-election. And that's really the problem, because that's people's focus. I am unconcerned about re-election. I want to make a difference now and immediately. Thank you.
I believe very strongly that my employer would be the people of New Hampshire, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats, and those are the folks to whom I will be accountable if I'm elected. You know, I think you can learn a lot about candidates by how they put together their campaigns. Our support in terms of contributions is 85% from the people of New Hampshire, most of whom are giving $100 or less. And in the future, that's how I'll put my campaigns together. Ultimately, my campaign is of, by, and for the people of the Granite State, and those are the folks that I'm going to be listening to if I'm fortunate enough to be serving them in Congress.
This is not a campaign for me. This is a continuation of the movement that I've been involved with for more than 40 years. I've been in the labor movement from the time I signed my union card in 1974. I was a labor representative, I was a firefighter, I'm a state representative, I've been an advocate for working families. If you believe in what I'm doing, if you believe in this movement, for progressive movement, for people, for working families, then that's how we're going to fund this campaign.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that as Democrats, we got to come up with issues that excite people, that are actually talking about things that is going to motivate folks to vote, and then go out and talk to those voters. And New Hampshire is small enough that we can do that. Our campaign is focusing on the field, focusing on knocking on doors. We're not focusing on raising the most amount of money in the state. It's about talking about issues that we care about. And if we do that, I really believe we are going to be elected because of the motivation that we're going to put in people to continue to fight for those ideas. And that's what's important.
I would approach the job in a very similar fashion to how I approached being a United States Marine Corps officer and serving in Iraq. One of the most important things I learned about leading was to listen. If you actually wanted to know what was going on with one of your Humvees, you walk down to the motor pool and listen to your corporals and listen to your sergeants. And that's the foundation of my leadership and where I learned about leadership. And that's how I would spend my time, if elected to serve you, is listening, talking, and listening to the people of New Hampshire, what your concerns are, what's on your mind, and going then and fighting tirelessly on your behalf. And one of the first things I would do is overturn Citizens United, because what I'm hearing from people throughout my campaign is that we are worried that democracy is under attack. We're worried democracy is under attack. The Koch brothers have said they're going to throw millions of dollars at this seat, and there's a lot at stake in this election. There is a lot at stake in this election. So one of the first things I would do is work to overturn Citizens United to protect and defend our democracy. Thank you.
Okay, the second set of questions all use the word PAC in them, so they were related one way or the other, and whether or not you accept certain money. So one of those puts it quite simply from New Hampshire Independent: would you refuse PAC bribes? That's probably the most succinct. Another specifically says, would you accept corporate PAC or lobbyist money? And then one points out that in one recent upset, the Democrat candidate, exit polling showed they pulled an upset, and a big factor in voters' mind was that they would not accept corporate PAC money. So I'll kind of throw those three out, and you can answer in any combination.
Yeah, I've pledged not to take a dime of corporate PAC money. So that is not something that I'm doing in my campaign, and I'm very, very proud of that. As I said, I would approach the job the way I approached my time in the Marine Corps, which was not about a political party and not about a president, but going to work and supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States. And what I'm doing right now is campaigning to go to work for the people of New Hampshire, Democrats, Independents, Republicans, the people of New Hampshire. And that's what I'd be focused on.
Yeah, I wouldn't be taking corporate PAC money. Certainly don't see any place for corporations to have that influence here, and would work to have an overturn of Citizens United from a constitutional standpoint. I would work towards not having PAC money, but I'm not going to be the first one to de-arm on that. I would work to have PAC money removed from that.
I know we have follow-ups too, but if we could, just keep moving for now. Thank you.
So Mike, I've made a commitment that the way I'm gonna fund this campaign is with the nickels and dimes of people. I've done that. There's thousands of people who every hour give a nickel and dime out of their work, their paycheck, and they put it into a fund for workers and what's in the best interest of workers. I will accept that money proudly because it's money from workers. I'm not gonna take corporate money. I don't want it. I don't need it. I'm gonna take the money, the nickels and dimes of the people who want to continue and be part of this movement that I'm involved with.
So I'm not taking any corporate PAC money in this campaign. I think one of the focuses we also have to have is also on the spending in our campaigns. You know, when Citizens United was handed down, since then we have seen a tenfold explosion in the amount of outside money being spent on our elections here and all across the country. That's a perversion of our democracy. You know, it has its roots in the Buckley v. Vallejo decision, which struck down congressional spending limits. I think we've got to work in a constitutional fashion to not just overturn Citizens United, but to limit the amount of money that Congress can, you know, they can put those spending limits in place so that we reduce the power that PACs and corporations and special interests have in our elections.
Yes, I have taken the pledge not only to not take any corporate PAC, but to take no PAC money. Also no money from lobbyists, DC lobbyists or otherwise.
As I stated earlier, I'm not going to take money from any PAC, regardless of the source. I'm not going to pledge a loyalty oath to anyone other than the voters of this state. Thanks.
I definitively will not take any money from corporate PACs. But here's the fundamental issue people have to understand. It's not about this, about corporate PAC money. It's where that money comes from. Because these guys are slick. These men and women are slick. What they say is this. They say, oh no, don't worry about it, no corporate PAC money. But then what they do is they give you the check another way. Just be careful when we talk about corporate PAC money. It's much more complicated than that.
Well, it's a sort of catechism, I guess, that we're not going to take PAC money, but I just want to come back on a little bit of a corrective, because it comes back to being a real candidate versus a candidate who makes promises. Well, all of the people in the Democratic Party talk about Citizens United. In order for it to pass the Congress, 2/3 of the Congress has to vote to send that amendment to the states. And then 2/3 of the states have to vote to do it. And I remind you that the Equal Rights Amendment, which I supported, never made it. In fact, they're doing something out in Illinois, and I can't figure out what it is, to try and pass their own amendment. So it's not an easy job. These are not easy things. And, well, we hear about the Sheldon Adelson, who's a miserable SOB in my opinion, and the Koch brothers, who I don't feel quite as strongly about. They're equal bad people in Hollywood. You go to the Republicans, and they'll tell you, well, the Hollywood people raise money because they're stars, and they get all this liberal money from Hollywood.
We want to try to keep these to 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So there are bad people on both sides. It's not easy making changes. That's why you have to look at their background.
Definitely not no corporate PAC money, no DC lobbyist money. I have been in my profession practicing campaign finance reform for 11 years. And at times it's felt like we've tied an arm behind our back. As I've said, we've been outspent 10-1. We really need to buckle down and fight against this dark money in politics from these 501c4s. We know that there's money coming in from foreign entities. We have to overturn Citizens United, and that's going to be one of my main focuses.
We need to go to the website, the FCC website, keep an eye on all of us. That's what I say. Do your due diligence, keep an eye on all of us and see where our money's coming from. And you're not going to see it coming in my pocket, you know. I mean, I guess I got an old soul. I believe in, I think our politicians should still get on the back of an old train and go run around the country. And I mean, that's how I believe we should be doing it. You know, I got an old truck out there with 300,000 miles on it. I run all over the state, and that's how I'm meeting the people, because the people are the ones who count.
I do want to thank everyone for making me the bad guy and cutting people off. I'm the outsider, so if you hate me, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to keep it moving occasionally. Everyone's been great, though. 3 related to alternate funding on campaign finance. The first is tell me how you can make yourself a credible leader in the campaign for public funding of elections. Second is, do you support a small donor public funding system? And third one is, would you bring back the old tax credit so that small donors could get it written off their taxes? So pick one of those to answer, at least starting with Brian.
Well, I believe in that. I believe in that our citizens, if they're going to help us get funded and get campaign, they should get a little bit of a tax break. I do believe that if you donate to a campaign, you should be able to get a tax break. And again, it's the people that count in New Hampshire. We need to go back to our first in the nation grassroots. And I believe once the rest of the country sees how we run a campaign in New Hampshire, if we can keep it within New Hampshire and we can keep it back to we the people, you're going to see it's going to spread like wildfire around the country. They're going to, maybe not California, they won't do that. So. But we're going to be, we'll change the country because of our first in the nation.
I support looking at all options to get the big dark money out of politics. So public funding, small donor funding, tax credit, that's all on the table. I also think it's really important to limit self-funding, going back to I want people from all backgrounds to be able to run for office. If you're a teacher, a nurse, whatnot, I want you to have the opportunity as well. So all of the above.
I hate to be the skunk at the garden party, but we did have a checkoff system where you could, on your tax return, I think it was $1 or $2 or $3, I don't remember the exact amount now. And that worked well for decades until Barack Obama blew it up. So sometimes, and he's probably pretty popular in this room, but he's the guy that destroyed campaign financing at the presidential level. Up until that time, we had something of a lid on it, and then it really exploded with the billions and billions. So it's not as easy to point partisan fingers, and I'm not pointing a partisan finger, I'm just saying he's the guy that did it, it's a fact. To get back to that is not going to be easy. In my party, they call public financing welfare for politicians. So there's a lot of opposition to each other. One of the things that I've always been good at as a mediator is trying to get people who will refuse to talk to each other to sit down and be civil and talk to each other. And I think I would do a lot of that in the House of Representatives, so they would find me a valuable contribution.
Congress makes the laws, not the president.
Yeah, you know, there's this thing called the small donor. There's this guy named Bernie Sanders. I don't know this guy very well, but this thing called the $27. So ultimately it gets a little complicated, obviously, in District 1, but the reality is we definitively have to have small donors. See, we have to create an incentive for people to actually get involved in politics. And the problem is now is that people are so disgusted with the political system, they have actually given up. So we need to revitalize democracy. And that means small donations, one person, one vote, get rid of Citizens United, and deal with it. The 28th Amendment is essential, and we can do it.
Yeah, I obviously support publicly funded elections, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. We've seen it in other states in this country, and of course other nations around the world. And one of the great advantages of publicly funded elections, and you'll see this in particularly other Western democracies, is it shortens the election season. And right now we're just in a state of continuous elections, and it's very acute here in New Hampshire. I mean, we're already being inundated by 2020 presidential candidates. So publicly funded elections not only gets the money out of politics, it also will give us all a break.
Yes, I would support legislation for public funding of elections. I also support ideas behind a small donor, and am open to discussing any combination of those. Also, to go back to, I think, which was the first question, which related to, you know, what would you do? What I would do is sponsor or co-sponsor any legislation that moves towards eliminating big money in politics.
strong supporter of the Government by the People Act, which has been introduced in Congress many times. The prime sponsor is Congressman John Sarbanes, who's a friend who's been up here campaigning for campaign finance reform many times. Carol is a co-sponsor. I would co-sponsor that legislation. It offers a $25 tax credit to everyone in the country so that there isn't a barrier for someone to be able to make a political contribution. And it also incentivizes those candidates who raise money in small increments from donors within their own district with matching funds. So I think that's a nice step forward for a system to create some public financing that's going to take down the barriers for people with good ideas who may not have the bank account or the deep-pocketed supporters to be able to fund their campaigns.
You know, one of the people at this table challenged Bernie Sanders getting on the ballot. Bernie Sanders, that was Mr. Martin, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
I did.
Filed a claim to keep Bernie up. This is the guy who ran on small donations. This is the guy that did it. And so I'm all for small donations. I'm all for getting money out of politics. But there are people right here who are coming in to defend campaign finance reform, who tried to keep the winner of the New Hampshire primary off the ballot, the guy who tried to do it by nickels and dimes.
Yeah, I would support public financing of elections. I would support small donation tax credits. I think that it's important. As a candidate, you have to run on ideas in order to get people excited enough to run on small dollar donations. And to be a candidate that, to Peter's point, I haven't taken any PAC money, nor any corporate PAC money. But I think it's important to win that way and to be able to make sure that you're able to carry on the message that you're actually beholden to the citizens that you're supporting.
Your means are your ends.
We have to change the system. The system does not work right now, and the current system is a threat to democracy. I would never suppose to speak for any other candidate, but it's certainly not, raising resources, it's not how we want to spend our time. It's not how we want to spend our time. So the system has to change. It's got to change, because again, it's a threat to democracy. I think there's a lot of things we got to take a really, really hard look at. We got to take a look at public financing. We got to take a look at a tax credit, because the system as it's set up right now, we got to take a look at how we make sure that people who are self-funding can't just go and self-fund. There's a lot of things we got to take a look at, because the system right now doesn't work. The system right now does not work. And that's what I would be focused on as a member of Congress, is fixing it.
Next to last grouping here, and I will ask this one to really try to keep to 30 so we get to the last one. There were 3 that related to some kind of amendment. So the first one is, would you introduce the real reform amendment? Basically, people can't give money from out of seas to U.S. elections. This would take it one step further to say you can only give to a candidate running in a district you can vote in. So that's one. Secondly, how did money become equal free speech? I question what does that stand for? Is that legal? What are your thoughts on this? And basically, I think implicitly, would you support a 28th Amendment to throw out Citizens United? And then the last one, would you support a Fix It America Amendment, which would both eliminate partisan gerrymandering and say that any campaign finance law would not be an abridgment of the First Amendment. This kind of answers the first one. So those are 3 options for amendments.
Hey, John, I need a yes or no on the real reform amendment.
Well, we can follow up after. We've got lots of questions.
So 3 questions in a brief time to do it. So I would support a president of either political party who is trying to introduce something to stop gerrymandering. It is a fundamental threat to our democracy. I would work with Republicans, I would work with Democrats, I work with independent members of Congress to make sure we don't have gerrymandering. This district is one of the few in the country where a Republican or Democrat could legitimately win. That's how every district should be. But gerrymandering is a threat to our democracy. And one of the first things I would do as a member of Congress is work to overturn Citizens United. There is so much dark money that's going to be thrown at this seat, and it is a threat to our democracy. So that's what I would do as a member of Congress. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess gerrymandering's there. So I don't think that politicians should be able to pick their voters. I think that voters should be able to pick their politicians. Pretty easy one. When it comes to the Real Reform Act, I would support that as written, as I read through that. I do think that we actually have to go a step further. Right now, I mean, there's a donor class in New Hampshire. Folks writing $2,700, $5,400 checks. Those aren't checks that anybody that I'm living with can afford to write. That's something that we need to be able to address as well.
Thank you. I spent 40 years in this business, in politics, support every candidate. I know a lot about it, what it takes to raise money, and I know what it's like to compete in an environment where the corporations and those people are piling on top of the candidates that we care about. I understand, I'm fully supportive of Citizens United, but don't forget, we got a lot of things we can do in the meantime to make sure we get the lobbyists out of the business, the pharmaceutical companies out of the business, to get those people who are trying to poison our air out of the business. All about money. Get it the hell out of politics.
The intent of the voter matters so much, but it's distorted by gerrymandering, which is why we need independent commissions to draw districts. We see the insanity of some of the districts right here in New Hampshire, and so I would support legislation and an amendment at the federal level to try to deal with that. I also support the Real Reform Act, as long as we can come up with a way to prevent folks who are self-funders from being able to walk in and buy an election in a district. So that's something I'd like to talk more about, but yes, count me as a yes on that.
It has to work its way through the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee to raise the point. I mean, obviously,
sure.
Yeah, I agree with what Chris said in reference to gerrymandering. I too am a yes on the Real Reform Act. I would sponsor or co-sponsor that. As to Citizens United, the two things legally that I find reprehensible about it, one is relying on the legal fiction that corporations are people. They are not. Secondly, the idea that money is speech. I understand the theory behind that argument, but I think it's a fallacy as well. So I would, again, I would support the Real Reform Act.
Just to answer the question, yes, I do support the Real Reform Amendment. I think it's a tremendous piece of legislation. Again, to agree with Lincoln there on corporations as people, that's outrageous. Just creeped its ugly head into our country in the Gilded Age. And we're now in a second Gilded Age because of Citizens United, and it needs to be overturned just like those nasty cases were from the 1870s and 1880s.
Yeah, obviously, 20th Amendment, absolutely essential. The Real Reform Act, absolutely. Citizens United, as I said over and over again, it has to be defeated. And 80% of Republicans and Democrats believe the same. Let's get our act together, let's get it done.
I think it's actually the Real Reform Amendment, not Act, and I would introduce it, which was the question. But I'd like to make a point that was made earlier. Somebody said we're being overrun by presidential candidates, and I hope the headline in the Monitor tomorrow is a candidate says we're overrun. New Hampshire people welcome this, particularly the businesses, the lodging, the restaurants. We're not trying to chase people away. And let me point out, the reason it's so hard to change the system is because it's so ingrained. If you go and say you're going to take the big money out of politics, they'll probably burn a cross in front of your front lawn from Channel 9 because they're making tens of millions of dollars. A lot of people profit from the current system, not just politicians. So it's not easy to make reform. You got to break some eggs before you get
Real Reform Act, we were speaking, I think it's a great idea, I'm supportive. I want to look at something about self-funders as well, limiting that, because I, once again, think that's really important. Yep, exactly. It's about getting the train out of the station, absolutely overturning Citizens United, anything and everything I can do about that. I also agree gerrymandering is a huge issue in this country. We need to fix that. I promise to be a champion on campaign finance reform issues. I will give it my all. Thank you.
I just think our congressmen and senators that are in Washington right now, the 85% that want to work to get rid of the Citizens United, I just think they're afraid to step up and get beat up a little bit. So I don't care. I'll step up and get beat up. I used to get beat up by my 7 brothers and sisters. I'm the youngest of 8, so you know what? I'll stand right up there and I'll squawk and I'll make sure I'll keep right at it. And yes, this Real Reform Amendment is going to come right with me to Washington, and it's going to be something that's going to be put right up, and I'm going to keep squawking about it. And I think that's the way we have to get things done, is by keep bringing it up and keep bringing it up and just being a thorn in their side.
Thank you. I do want to say we're at 2:30, so we're going to wrap up here. There are a few questions I didn't get in that I'm sure the candidates will have time, but they weren't really campaign finance as much, or a couple other gerrymandering questions, whether or not you support Nancy Pelosi, whether immigration impacts campaign finance reform. These are all legitimate questions. Just because they weren't campaign finance reform, I just want you to understand that was how I tried to order to get us done by 2:30. But all good questions, and certainly anyone wants to ask them one-on-one. But we said we finish up at 2:30, and so we're formally done. John, you take that?
John Putner